Pat, I was reflecting on your own ministry within the church over a number of years, and I was thinking of how varied it has been. You're a member of the Sisters of Mercy and have been involved very often in what I call compassionate presence, just talking to prisoners and being present to people who needed an ear. And you've been involved in the social causes and demonstrations and ending up in jail and all those terrible things, and also marching for peace and working for economic justice and so on. And so and you also, interestingly enough, been a teacher in your career and have spent time with other kinds of ministries. So in a way you model for me a number of different ministries. I've been interested in the recent past in trying to identify the kinds of ministry that's going on in the church, because I think we are in an era in which it is flowering, in which so many people are involved, and I think it's important to name what people are doing, to analyze it a bit, and to find ways of encouraging that idea. And with that in mind, I've developed what I think of as models of ministry. I call one compassionate presence, something we might find in Mother Teresa, for example. I call another one a liberating activity, the kind of thing that Martin Luther King did. I also think of liturgical ministry and the ministry of forming faith communities and the ministry of service to the world. And finally, this ministry that I want to talk about now, which I call formation or proclamation of the Word. It's really the ministry of teaching, of instruction, and formation. So I'd like to begin to do that, and that takes you back to your teaching career, I suppose, and the main way that you've carried out this particular ministry. I know that, for one thing, that you often find that to be very energizing, and one of the things that sort of builds you up to be able to sustain the effort as a minister within the church. Do you want to comment on that formation ministry?
Well, I certainly do find it energizing. I think I'm a frustrated actress, and I basically enjoy having a captive audience in the classroom. So I merrily go about my task of corrupting the youth of America.
Modern-day Socrates, is that it?
Well,
the gadfly, is that how you think of your ministry?
I suppose, in some sense, I do.
Maybe gadfly, but not corrupting the youth.
Well, no, not seriously corrupting the youth.
No.
I suppose one reason that I get such a kick out of teaching is because I teach English, I teach literature, and in a sense one could see literature as the perhaps the phenomenology of theology in our present day.
I like that. A good phrase, the phenomenology
and
of
it was
theology.
Isn't that
it just
incredible?
Came out. I never heard that before.
Out.
In other words, literature is sort of giving us a narrative of what theology is saying. It's fleshing it out. It's giving us good descriptions of what theology is saying about the divine-human relationship. I'm going to do a program on that, Pat, or write an article on it.
Wonderful,
I like it.
Wonderful.
I will give you a footnote.
Oh, that is not even necessary.
Title from Sister Patricia Schnapp.
Well, we see the contemporary writers reflecting the concerns of contemporary people, and many of these concerns, I mean, the deepest concerns are inevitably meaning sorts of questions. Right now, my students are reading The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, which on one level is a sort of a black humor science fiction novel. But the constant and repeated and abiding concern is there any meaning? If you can find any meaning up there on Mars, give me a telephone call and tell me what it is. Or if you can figure out why whoever made us did it and what we're all doing here, I'd appreciate it if you'd clue me in. And constantly we get this almost as a refrain throughout the novel. So I think we see even writers who might consider themselves, as Vonnegut does, agnostic, still seriously grappling with the very questions that theology is concerned about, and spurring students to examine their own values and their own belief systems. And I guess that I feel privileged to participate in their searching this out.
One thing I would get out of that is that this formation teaching ministry can be carried out in non-religious settings.
That's right.
In other words, when we're talking about ministry in this case, it is not simply a matter of teaching people about the Bible, or of a priest getting up in church and preaching, or of a minister mounting the pulpit to deliver the word to the people. That you've broadened it out by saying that the ministry of formation can be carried out in many settings. So maybe we would think of parents doing that, for example, as they raise their children and inculcate values in them. Maybe parents are carrying that formation ministry out simply by living well as husband and wife, and modeling for their offspring the way people ought to interact, the kind of mutual respect that should exist, and the love that ought to flow in that kind of union. So that a ministry becomes a much broader term. I suppose there's some places where we would end up saying that not every type of teaching is clearly a ministry. I mean, somebody teaching an apprentice about carpentry is doing a very important thing and helping that person to develop a terrific skill, but I'm not sure we would think of it as ministry. But the way you described what you do is an opening up of the depth questions of life, of meaning and purpose and identity, of getting people to reflect on their value system, of trying to help people construct a larger vision of the world, be able to analyze who they are and where they fit. That seems to me to move more in the direction of what I think of as ministry. That is, a baptized person working out of a faith community, trying in one way or another to spread the kingdom, to help people come closer to God, and having a certain skill that they bring to bear on that. But when you talk about teaching ministry in that way, or ministry of formation, I think more people would be drawn into it. I mean, think of all the people who teach in CCD classes, to begin with. Think of all of the people who are trying to form youth in one way or another, teachers and counselor-type people. Parents obviously fit into all of that. Clergy people who preach the Word and simply try to create structures where young people can interact. So formation teaching goes on. I suppose we shouldn't neglect the kind of peer teaching and formation that goes on among adults. What about the kind of the divorce groups that meet, or alcoholics who come together to minister to one another, trying to form healthier personalities, help people get over their problems, and so on. Maybe we could see that as a type of formative ministry as well. Very important service to perform. You were suggesting, again, I think, a lot of the values of this, that this is not only energizing, but it does a lot of other good things for us. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you were very concrete in what you were saying, that in the classroom you feed off of the students and you get energy from them. I was thinking that a lot of people involved in the formation ministry have to learn something. That is, they are forced by dint of circumstances to go back and read something or go to a lecture or whatever. So parents dealing with teenagers and worried about the drug problem may have to go to a workshop on drugs, or read a book, or talk to people who know about such a subject. Preachers who have to proclaim the Word have to read commentaries on the Scripture and get and prepare for what they're doing and study theology. So that it seems like one of the feedbacks or the positive byproducts of being involved in this ministry is that you have to learn and deepen your own understanding.
I think one of the geniuses of the post-Vatican II development within parishes is in having parents instruct their children before receiving certain sacraments, because precisely what you're talking about has happened. The parents have realized that they perhaps need to have their own theology retooled, and so they attend classes first to make sure that they are not going to be giving any heretical doctrines to their children. But in the process, of course, they're updating their own theology. They're learning more about the theology of the sacraments, for instance, and touching in on many developments that have occurred since their own formation as children in these areas. And I think that's a master stroke to have in install the parents as the primary teachers in these areas.
It seems there's a certain fittingness about all of that. I suppose one of the things that's needed, of course, then is to help the parents carry out this role. I mean, some of them don't feel entirely comfortable as being teachers and instructing their children about First Communion or First Confession or even at baptism time, so that the parents need help with all of this. And that creates a whole adult education enterprise and is one way of drawing people into it, and I think a legitimate way, because usually we learn best when there is a need pressing. So,
when we know we're going to have to turn around and teach it to someone else.
That's right.
That's
I
right.
mean, if the youngster in the 8th grade is being confirmed and needs to know a certain amount, and the parents have the job of doing that, then they're probably going to read something or go
That's
to a
right.
class. It's very immediate, and it draws us in naturally. So, I think there is something healthy about that. I mentioned baptism before because I think the same thing goes on there. There's these programs now that say, well, if you're going to have your child baptized, you have to go through some preparation yourself so you know what it's about, so you can be a good leader or guide for them as this all goes on. And you have taken on a heavy responsibility. There's a beautiful prayer in the baptism about, you're the first teachers of your child in the faith, may you be the best of teachers. And so there is this ministry of formation built right into our sacramental structure. And in the past, I think people often wanted to get out of that and lay that off onto the clergy or the nuns and say, they're the ones who are trained, let them teach my kids. And now we're seeing a new and I think a really healthy development.
And of course we see this as well in marriage preparation, where married couples themselves instruct the couple that is about to be, or the couples that are about to be married. And again, in the process, probably have to do much deeper reflection on their own experience or study on the particular area that they are going to instruct on.
Another really good example. I've seen couples do that so effectively. I mean, just for example, try to model communication, sit in the middle of a circle of young people preparing for marriage, and just talk to one another and try to really have successful communication, very open and honest dialogue, and it really is a powerful thing to see.
Yes.
And I think that they do learn, and well, I've heard them say that, couples who involve me teaching these marriage courses, that they learn an awful lot as they go along about each other and
Yes.
about their quality of their own married life. So there's probably a lot of examples. Well, you and I were involved in a situation of total family program, which I thought was a good example of a formation technique where the whole family would be educated at one time on a given theme, and there would be classes for the first graders and various grades, and then a specific for high school students and so on, and for the adults, and they'd all be studying the same theme. And the idea was to get the family talking about it then later on, give them some activities to try to deepen the conversation within family life. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking that's one of our great problems, isn't it? Sort of superficiality, that the reason we need formation and teaching is because we live in a secularized world where these things are not naturally dealt with, where the religious dimension is often lost, and where people don't know theology, and where we have religious illiteracy, and where the whole medieval world that held together and you knew who you were and where you fit in the scheme of things and how you were related to God, that is broken down. Secularization process has made the task of formation even more important, and in some senses, I suppose, more difficult, because there's a whole lot that is presupposed very often in religious education that just can't be counted on in today's world.
Do you think we should go back to memorizing the answers in the Baltimore Catechism, Jim?
That's exactly where I was going with this whole discussion, yes. No, I don't think that's the answer, to go back to memorizing, but what is the answer is that we create a community of teaching learning, that we think of the church as that kind of community where learning is prized and where we are teacher to one another. Not where there's one guy who's supposed to be an expert and can tell everybody else what's going on, but where everyone has a gift or charism, particular insight, a skill, knowledge, that they're able to contribute to the others. And so the role of teacher-learner could easily switch. I'm sure you find that in your classes. At times, the student becomes the instructor. In other words, they know things, and they have particular experiences that they bring to bear on the question, or share with the class, or challenge you with a question they become the instructor. And I think that role reversal is really important in understanding this ministry of formation. Because if we just leave it to the bishops or to the priests, the nuns, it isn't going to get done.
That's right. I was taking a scripture course just a few years ago, and I think the technical name of it was andragogy.
Yeah,
is that right? Andragogy.
Yeah.
But
the author's name was Truster.
That's right.
Jean Truster.
Jean Truster, right. But
that.
the methodology of the course is precisely what you've been talking about. Different members of the class in small groups would assimilate just a small portion of the text for a given class and devise some very creative way of presenting and teaching that to the other members of the class. And it was one of the most delightful courses I've ever taken, one of the most entertaining, as well as one of the classes in which time seemed to pass more rapidly almost than in any other. But I've thought often, and I've tried in some small ways to incorporate that into my own classroom teaching of what a useful technique that is, to insist upon the learners teaching the other learners.
Well, and that's when you learn. I remember when I taught in the seminary, the students had sort of a practicum, pastoral activity, and they had to be involved in some sort of teaching thing. And it was common to have them teach youngsters someplace. And I reversed that, and I wanted them to teach adults and to be involved in those kind of programs. And what they found, of course, is they couldn't just get by with bopping into a classroom and talking to little kids, although I don't want to play that down because I think that requires great skill, too. And they were foolish to think they could just bop in and do it, because that requires a special kind of talent. One has to be in touch with the needs of those youngsters and the developmental process and so on, and know the right words and stories and so on. But what having them teach adults forced them to go back and redo their own theology. They would get in there and try to say what they believed about the church or Christ. They might get challenged and say, wait a second. So that forced them back to their courses to read more carefully and to develop their own particular outlook on the question. So that really is a valuable technique, and maybe one that needs to be tapped more in this ministry of formation that we're talking about.
I was interviewed last night by a college student on some of my involvements in peace issues, and I found that the interview itself was very important for me because she kept asking challenging questions and forcing me to articulate why I was involved, what my hopes were, what I saw as the problems, whether I felt I was being overly idealistic or was in fact realistic about the depth of the problems. And in a sense, I almost felt as if I was making a retreat underneath her scrutiny and her very fine questions. And in a sense, I think we can, this is another teaching strategy, is to ask the questions that force people to articulate, and before they can articulate, they have to reflect on some of their deepest values, that in forcing them to spell out what they believe, we are also, I think, helping them intensify their own belief. Just as I find that when I speak on an issue, I find myself convincing myself more than I was before I got up and spoke on it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. I do follow that. And I think that I was interviewed by that same student recently, and I found her questions also to be very probing. And it's interesting that I had the same type of experience you're talking about. I felt I was learning myself better as I was talking, and I said some things about my own involvement in the peace movement and so on that I really didn't even realize. And I found it to be part of that education formation process. Very experience that you had. That is fascinating, and that takes us back to the whole Socratic method that you sort of introduced at the beginning, so that Socrates was always going around asking questions. He was the gadfly because he would take on the assumptions of his culture and force people to think beneath the surface. So while they said he was corrupting the youth, as a matter of fact, he was leading them to a fuller humanity, so that the touchstone became know yourself. If you're the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's what we are about. I'm afraid some people have a lot of misconceptions about what formation might be all about, or this educational ministry we're talking about. And we probably need to broaden that out. I think by taking the concrete examples, it becomes clearer. The teacher in the classroom is helping someone to hone their intellect so they can understand life and deal with it better. But parents are doing something else. They're not appealing just to intellect. They are modeling what life is about. They're creating a situation where youngsters can trust and probe and experiment. They're creating a loving atmosphere so that the offspring can really grow to full maturity. They are giving off signals about what they treasure. Their value system is coming across. Their faith commitment becomes part of the whole atmosphere of the house. And so, I don't want to overblow that and say, parents aren't walking around as saints, but just in their ordinary activities, they are involved in this formation, which is larger than appealing to the intellect. In the classroom, when you teach English, you're after the mind. You want critical thinking, and you want people to be engaged with the material. In the home and in the church and at liturgy and on retreats, I think maybe we're doing something a little bit different. We're forming the whole person, trying to help them, in our Christian understanding, put on the mind of Christ. An example of people giving retreats these days. We have collegians who just, 12 of them got together, prepared their talks, dealt with the whole retreat, recruited the other students, got it all ready. They went off for the weekend and they shared their own faith development, just talked simply and personally about what was going on with them, thus helping to form the other students. It's a good example of ministry that's being multiplied these days.
I think an analogous example of that is having students or having a group of parishioners plan liturgies, read the scriptural readings and focus in on what they see as the primary theme in those readings and decide how to enflesh it in a liturgical setting. That again, what's happening is this is perhaps, again, maybe not as intellectual as value concerned sort of formation, but very often they will find that they want to read a commentary, or they're encouraged to read a commentary to get more insight into the meaning of a particular passage, to touch in on critical scriptural studies, and so they are both learning and enfleshing in some way their insights in a setting which will be then hopefully valued and certainly experienced by a number of other people. So again, their own faith, their own knowledge are simultaneously, I think, in that situation being stretched and deepened.
As we're talking about all of this, it is remarkable the amount of ministry that's going on in the church today. We recently identified something like 50 leaders or people with responsibility in our parish. There's so many people involved, teaching marriage courses for the young people and planning their own retreats and helping with the liturgy and so on. It really is quite a remarkable flourishing since the Second Vatican Council. I think that notion of the Council that we are the church really is catching on. And I believe a lot of our Protestant friends look at us these days, and they, who understood so well lay ministry and the common universal priesthood of all the baptized, are looking at us now in a sense as saying, geez, they got something good going on. And we need to revitalize our own sense of lay ministry and involvement in the congregation. So I think there's a good interplay. We've learned from them, and now maybe because we're doing some things well, they can learn from us as well. So ministry of formation is a vital one. I suppose a lot more of it goes on than we ever imagine. What about the teacher who just simply does a good job and the student says, they care? Or the coaches who function like this? People who work in Big Brother or Big Sister programs, all kinds of activities, I think, of this formation. And always I think there's this theological dimension in all of this. I mean, it's not just a psychological matter of trying to form character, but the sense that we're helping people to get in touch with the Word of God, that God is the teacher. Aquinas had that marvelous image of God as the master teacher, gradually instructing the sons and daughters. And it is a part of our whole idea. God is truth, we say. And what we are doing in formation is helping people to get in touch with that truth. And then if you want to extend the theological analysis, you look at Christ and you say, there's the master teacher, the great storyteller, the person who knew the character of the people he interacted with, who knew how to bring out the best in them. He was an enabler, a facilitator, the one who said, there's spirit in you, there's grace, and we're going to make it happen. I'm going to elicit that from you through questions, through encouragement, and so on. So I think that maybe helps us to understand a bit of what this formation ministry is all about.
That it may not be in the explicit messages that we give verbally, but that in a sense we are all a gospel too, that we are a walking embodiment of a certain set of values. And so you mentioned the coach being someone who, if he's a good coach, is involved in formation. I think it's something that's humbling, but something that it's well for us to reflect on. If someone were to try and induce from what seemed to be my attitudes and my behavior, what I believe about what is important in life, would they, what would they write down? If they knew nothing, did not know I was a Christian, what would they write down as what they see as my values or philosophy?
Yes, I think that's a good reflection for all of us in ministry to take home, because I think that when we're trying to live out the gospel, we are making an impact on others, and just our attitudes that we bring to things. So, Pat, we've been trying to talk about ministry here, and it means something like purposeful activity to help spread the community of love in the world. It's done by baptized people who care about others, who are willing to reach out to others. And part of this whole ministry is that of formation or proclamation of the word. It includes preaching in the church and the bishops writing pastoral letters, but it also includes parents trying to form their children in proper values, and teachers in the classroom. And all of it has an adventuresome character, an excitement of trying to help others come closer to God.